It raises a bunch of questions.
And they already have somebody in the volunteers to get them to that process. I know. Well, it seems to interested in going to private communities because once you go to private communities, you keep it out. They then own the site.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
All right, I can see who's on participants. I can see who's here. Should I make Bob, Enos, Miles?
Oh, you got the names?
Yeah, I need to people need to be.
I don't know.
Bob, Enos.
Yep.
Cloud Care, I don't know. Cloud Care.
Cloud Care.
Cloud Care.
Okay, we'll need to figure out who that is.
Laura Bergstresser.
Yep.
Martha McLean. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. When you open the door, you got someone under the name of the file here. You can pull up, you can also pull forward Nancy Tzinski
Okay.
and Laura Bergstresser as presenters.
All right. Then how about Curtis Atkinson?
What's that?
Curtis Atkinson or Sheila?
Pull in, I'm sorry, pull in Curtis Atkinson. And you can pull in Nancy Tzinski.
Okay, yeah, she should be in.
And Laura Bergstresser.
Yep, they're in.
But you can see them. Everybody else is not.
But they're not on to present.
Nope, but if they have anything to add, it's the right question for them, you can still.
Want me to ask them?
Yes.
It's just as Sheila.
Yeah, just that Sheila.
Is she in?
Yep.
She does not need to be presenter. Yeah, Sheila and
Yeah.
Sheila, are you ready to pull that up to just meeting?
Yeah, you guys.
You're good to go?
You guys are good to go.
Is there any way we can see something other than Sheila? Or?
Yeah, I can get rid of Sheila.
See you next week.
All right, you guys should be good to go.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Family that were.
Sorry for the delay, folks, by the way.
You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, if we're ready. Call meeting to order. It's 5:55 p.m. And first of all, I'd like to ask for the minutes. We need to know everybody who's online, and we have people's names except for Cloud Pear. Could you identify yourself? Can you unmute if they are trying to speak? And the other person we need a last name is Sheila.
Should be able to talk.
You should be unmuted now if you want to go ahead, speak. If not, we'll have to kick you off.
Paris, Rebecca Gordon, and or Frank.
Okay, Rebecca Gordon.
Is there a job message for that?
It's Sheila. Hello.
Sheila who?
Yeah, but I'm not getting any picture and anything from you on YouTube or CATV, nothing.
You should be able
Obviously,
to get,
you're hearing me, but I don't see her, you.
Yeah, is Sheila, are you Sheila Bowinkle?
Yes,
Thank you.
but is this Zoom or am I on cable TV or what? Nothing was working.
we should be live on TV, on YouTube now. But she's on Zoom.
She's on what?
She's on Zoom, but we're also live on YouTube now.
Can you tell her that?
Can she see the meeting on Zoom?
No. I don't think she can.
No. Well, there you have it.
Nobody else is allowed to speak with your chat. Well, I think we're going to go ahead with the meeting. I think we've done enough technical stuff for a while. And right now we're going to, I need a motion for the minutes.
I'll make a motion to accept the November 8th site visit minutes the public meeting minutes and the minutes from the select board meeting.
Okay, I didn't think we had minutes for the site visit. You do? Oh, okay, okay. Okay. Gordon, do you want to, anybody want to second that? One second. Gordon seconds. Is there any discussion? Curtis, Martha? No?
Is there a time change?
Yeah, okay. So I would like to suggest that we correct the time on the November 8th minutes for the public hearing. I believe, Martha, it ended at 6:30 anyway, rather than 5:30. We were here quite a while. You see that?
Is this for the public hearing?
It started at 4:30 and we were not done by 5:30.
Okay, I'll correct that.
So, I'd like to call for a vote with that correction. Are we all in favor?
Yep.
Martha,
Yes.
motion passed. Now I need a motion for the orders. Okay, Gordon,
I move we accept the accounts payable as presented. Or yours up to 12, 6. All 6 of which.
is there any discussion? Anybody have any questions about the accounts payable? I did. Did the cleaning fee go up?
It's for a 5-week month, where instead of 4, for the library, so if we do a little bit more. then-
Okay, thank you. That's all I have. Anybody else? Martha, Curtis, do you have any questions? No.
Yeah, question on the ordinance mapping. I'm not sure I know what that is.
It's going to allow us to extract data that we have and can continue to put together. It's going to allow us to utilize GIS features, et cetera. So it's actually not a bad way to go compared to, so we use CAI already for tax mapping and other things. So we're piggybacking on some of the features we already have, which allows us to do quite a bit, I think, instead of going out and buying, software unto itself.
There's just an annual fee, the 3,300.
So that is a setup fee. You will see the annual fee in the budget discussion that we've got coming up.
So did we, I don't think we voted on that. So all in favor?
Five.
Okay, motion passed, thank you. Adjustments to the agenda, I believe there's one.
I would like to discuss the state handoff to the towns on the mask mandate.
Okay. I think we can probably just do that now and take care of it, boom, done.
Excuse me,
Yeah,
what did Phil say? He'd like to discuss what?
The mask mandate, the state, the legislature decided to push the decision about a mask mandate, instead of making it statewide, they said they'd leave it to the towns. So we want to make a decision on that.
My feeling is that we should recommend and not require the use of masks. Furthermore, we should respect the requirements for wearing masks in public buildings. and just urge our fellow citizens to receive COVID vaccinations and the booster, should it be available, or when it's available. So that's, I think,
Glenn, you want to say anything?
that's my same thought. Carefully. So, besides creating a lot of problems.
Martha?
Yes, I'm here.
Weigh in on
I-
this?
I could not really hear Phil very clearly. I think I got the gist of what he's saying, but the sound quality is very difficult.
I think, yeah, so I think they have to speak up.
To help you.
I need to turn this on.
In response to, in response to our governor's request that town decide whether masks should be worn for COVID reasons or not, I would suggest that we recommend the use of masks, wearing masks in towns, and not require masks to be worn. That we respect the rules for the town office, that masks be worn in all town buildings. And I recommend that people receive their vaccination and a booster shot when appropriate.
Martha, do you want to say anything?
I'm not sure how would this change what's already happening as far as the town offices? We're already masking in the town buildings, so what would change?
Well, nothing's going to change if we, unless we decide, yes, we want a mask mandate throughout the town, which we are talking about now. And my feeling is that none of us would approve of that. So I'm now going to ask Curtis for your opinion.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I would be concerned about if we had sort of a recommendation for masks, if that was kind of the official policy, is that people might be confused about the mask requirement in public buildings. If they see the select board says masks are recommended, but in public buildings, they're requirement, if that might be a point of confusion or contention for town employees.
I can see where there'd be some confusion.
Yeah, my feeling of bringing it up is that we're surrounded in the Upper Valley by other towns that are taking a stand one way or the other, and I want to at least acknowledge what our position is. Curtis, and Dave, I do agree. Using two R words, required and recommended, are confusing, as to where they apply. So I'm not asking for a motion, unless my colleagues would like that, I'd be happy to make a motion, but I do at least feel we need to recognize the situation.
I
wouldn't, this personally, I wouldn't worry about confusion. Bound to be some confusion different ways at different times. So People got to pay attention to the difference between recommendation and requirement. If they are going to be required in town buildings, and we just think it's wise. People use masks, but we're not going to tell them they have to.
We're not telling anybody to use them in commercial establishments. That's the difference. They are required in town buildings, but not in commercial establishments in Hartland. So Curtis, would you like to make a motion? If you don't want to, I'll ask Phil.
No, I just thought Phil might have come with something. If
You look
if
at
not,
this, I'll wake you up.
what?
Nothing. Go ahead.
If we wanted to include the recommended for commercial establishments, then it might be useful to be explicit about the requirement for public buildings. In which case I might say something like, we move that we require masks in public buildings according to the discretion of the town manager, and recommend masks be worn in commercial establishments as well.
That's pretty much what I was thinking.
No, he said it first. You want a second?
Sure, I'll second.
Martin?
Did he say required commercial business?
No.
No, he did not say required. That's explicitly what we're trying to get to with this motion. So if there's no more discussion, we will vote on the motion. And do you want to read it back? Anybody? Curtis, did you write it down? You can remember it. Go ahead.
So it was move that we require the use of masks in public buildings according to the town manager's discretion, and recommend the use of masks in commercial establishments.
You seconded.
I did.
Gordon seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Okay, now we have public comments. A few minutes for public comments. Is there anybody here who wants to comment on anything? 3, 2, 1. No public comments. Okay. Now we go to.
Out there, Lisa, I don't see it.
We are now number 4, old business, which has to do with the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA funding, and the establishment of a committee.
Mary, just let me jump in before you go to, before you interact with Sarah. Curtis, I just want to, I did a little research. Last meeting, there was a little bit of discussion on whether this would need to be warned as a select board meeting or not. And there was some discussion that, well, if this was just a community gathering, or if this was a Two Rivers, you know, type thing, that the select board would not need to warn it. So I spent some time talking to Sarah today, and I think that the nature of this meeting, you know, you're looking to extract the committee out of this. Ultimately, the final product, the recommendation is going to come in front of the select board. So I think that ultimately it would need to be, it's basically a town function. So it's going to need to be warned as a select board meeting instead of how I put it last time we were together. Just wanted to make sure brought that to the forefront before we got into discussion on it.
Dave, can you be clear about what meeting you're talking about?
The January meeting.
So we're talking about 2 meetings in January that we set, that we brought Sarah here to discuss how we were going to run these 2 meetings.
Right.
The first one, I think, being a bigger one.
again, just wanted to be specific.
Yep.
For the general public to know what we're talking about.
Okay,
Sarah?
I think it might be best over by Sarah, but,
Yeah. This is Sarah Wright from Two Rivers Adequacy Regional Commission. And she's going to talk to us about the process of having a town-wide meeting to figure out what projects we can fund with ARPA money. It's very narrow. Go ahead, Sarah. Thank you for coming tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. So my name is Sarah Rada, I work as a regional planner with Two Rivers Adequacy Regional Commission. We met at a previous meeting. Two Rivers is providing support to all of the towns in our region. Or in the process of sort of identifying projects that are eligible to be funded under ARPA. And then also assisting with public outreach efforts that towns might want to undertake in order to gather public input for project ideas. And so I know in our last conversation, we had talked about how the town's interested in possibly having a couple of meetings and also establishing a committee to sort of winnow down project ideas, to first gather input and then winnow down ideas. And so in talking with Dave earlier, he asked me to come this evening and just share some thoughts on how those meetings might go. I can share reflections on how other meetings have gone, and some broad recommendations and some questions for the select board to consider how you'd like to move forward. So in terms of what David said about the open meeting law applying, it's the opinion of our office that open meeting law would definitely apply to this meeting, and so it needs to be a hybrid meeting for state regulation. So somebody would need to be present at a physical location. I'm happy to be present in person if that would be helpful. And Dave and I spoke earlier today about how whatever advertising that goes out to the community could encourage people to attend remotely if at all possible, just because the cases are rising. And so in the interest of public safety, having more people on remotely would be helpful. In terms of advertising, Service is able to assist with drafting announcements and drafting a newspaper ad, if that's helpful, press release, that sort of thing. We're not able to actually place that newspaper ad or go knock on doors or flyer or do anything like that, but we can help you with the language. And then, oh, thank you so much. Ooh, it's the loudest my voice has ever been. Thank you. And then in terms of the costs that the town might incur for doing outreach work, such as placing a newspaper ad, you can charge that to ARPA, right? So you can cover that using your ARPA funds because they're considered, one of the permissible uses of ARPA funds is any expenses that you have for administering the grant, as it were. So that can be considered part of this if it's part of the public outreach that you're doing. And then before I sort of dive into the meetings structure specifically, I did want to say that if the town is considering creating a committee to sort of dive deeper into these specific project ideas that are generated and then make recommendations to the select board, we've been in conversation with the LCT obviously since the very beginning of this whole process, and one of the recommendations that we're getting from the LCT very strongly in the past 2 weeks is that towns that are establishing committees should really have a formal document that lays out in writing the purposes of that committee, the goals, the ultimate sort of the boundaries that the committee has to operate within, and then the sort of deliverable that they're giving, what they're going to be creating or producing for the select board. So just to memorialize that in writing for the purposes of documentation under ARPA would be a great idea. And then, so in terms of meeting one, I was sort of thinking back to our experience with other ARPA meetings and also, just other community meetings that we've led in general. I think it would be beneficial for someone from the town to give an introduction and explain why the meeting is being held, what the purpose is, what the goal is out of that meeting. Very briefly, just a couple minutes. And then I would be happy to sort of give a brief overview of what ARPA is, what kinds of projects are eligible, what's definitely not eligible under ARPA. As you know, ARPA gets very meaty very quickly, so I wouldn't really dig deep into the details there, but I would give the sort of broad parameters that people can operate within. and we can deal with specific questions as they arise. And then from there, I imagine we could sort of delve into a collective brainstorming session. When there are sort of just a few people on the line, what I've done is sort of created a Google document that everybody can view, right? And I'll be typing into it, or just a document that's on my computer, and I share my screen so that folks can see, and I'm taking notes as people are talking. When there are more people participating, one thing that I found to be effective is sort of create a Google document that anybody can edit, because you can have up to 100 people editing a Google document at any time. And so as people are listening and talking and thinking, if folks don't feel comfortable speaking out loud, or if there's just not time for them to get their comments in because everybody else is talking, they can enter their comments in directly into the Google document. So we found that to be successful. And very easy too, and it doesn't have the sort of learning curve challenges that other, like the higher technical whiteboards and things like that have. So that's one option. And then in terms of like closing the meeting out, again, the town would say a few words and explain next steps moving forward. As part of that community brainstorming session, one of the things that I wanted to sort of put to you as a question, because it really depends on what you want the committee to work on, if you're going to be establishing a committee and what you want to achieve in these public meetings. Two things that might be helpful to ask the public about would be, okay, what are the evaluation criteria that we should consider when we're ultimately looking at a long list of projects? What are the criteria we should be using to decide which ones we're ultimately going to go with? And then how should we rank those criteria so we can assign weights to different criteria? And again, that may be something that's purely the purview of the committee once it gets established, or the select board itself once they have a list of projects in front of them. But it's something to consider. It's a question: do you want to collect that kind of information? As we talked about last time, it is important to gather as much information as you can about each specific project idea in terms of time frame, in terms of cost estimate, and other sort of more weedy eligibility questions that might come up, like, okay, well, who is the population that this is going to serve, that sort of thing. So I think in the course of that public meeting, the first public meeting, if folks have that information readily available, that's great. Let's gather it at that moment. If it's something that folks have to go back and look up or talk to some people about, then it might be helpful to assign homework, as it were, and say, okay, so-and-so, you brought up this project idea, would you be willing to communicate with Sarah after this meeting and, pin down those final details? And I was thinking that at the second meeting, if the town decides to have a second public meeting, that's when you can sort of report back on those questions that were hanging from the first meeting about individual project ideas. And from there, if you decided that you do want the community to sort of go through a ranking process and actually do some like decision making on, okay, this is the project idea that we want to, or this is a subset of project ideas that we want the community to work on, where you could have community members vote, you could have community members actually sort of cast their ballots, as it were, for individual project ideas. That's another way to approach it. I think at the end of that second meeting, if you're going to move into a sort of a committee structure, you'll want to have gathered as much information as possible. If you want to accept new ideas in that second meeting, that's something you'll have to think about ahead of time, because that will mean a little bit more research following the second meeting. The new ideas that come up, people that vote, there are outstanding questions about specific ideas. And I think, for meeting two, what I was thinking is that, it wouldn't be necessary to really go into another refresher on what ARPA is and all the rest of that stuff. It could be sort of very brief, certainly not as detailed as the first meeting, but there would be sort of a recap of the ideas that were presented in meeting one, to refresh people's minds and, obviously reporting back on the information that was learned in the interim between the two meetings. And then, as we talked about, possibly doing ranking of project ideas, that sort of thing. So those are the ideas that I had sort of pulled together, thinking through options moving forward. David shared that you had identified some possible dates I would note that if you would like to have that first community meeting the week of January 10th, and you're going to be doing outreach, it's going to be important to get outreach out as soon as possible, because I believe we come back from sort of the New Year's holiday on the 3rd, so that really only gives you a week. And many folks are still going to be sort of coming out of holiday mode. So, so I think it's going to be important to get outreach out as soon as possible if you'd like to have that meeting in the week of January 10th. So yes, but I blocked out all those possible dates on my calendar, so
So you did.
I was the list of all this, yeah. Anyway, I'll stop speaking there. And, pass it over to you, should I do this?
Thanks, Emma. I have a question. Does Two Rivers have a template for that formal document for the ARPA committee?
We do not have a template, however, we do have an example from another town that we can pass it on.
Okay, so you'll send that to Dave?
Yep.
Great. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. Thank you.
Sarah, great outline. I want to go back to the first meeting. I found myself getting a little muddled with part of it. So I understand the intros, and you're being willing to sort of give a high level. This is what we can do or not. It's going to be fabulous. But the brainstorming session, we're literally looking to just collect ideas and not critique them at this point. And for example, if I said, let's pave the Coochie Road, would you say, sorry, Phil, that's out of bounds, or would we actually capture that?
I think it's a good idea so the way we've done this in other cases is when those ideas ever come up that don't really fit in ARPA, we have a sort of separate area in our note-taking sheet that's called other, right? Because we don't want to lose those ideas, and the infrastructure bill is coming down the pipe, so who knows what might be possible in years ahead. So that's just sort of, we put it under other, and I can explain to folks why that doesn't quite fit in that framework. Does that help?
Yeah, sure. A technical question. Are you thinking of using the Google Drive suite? Or when you say using Google products, I wasn't sure what you were talking about.
Yes, so like a Google document within Google Drive.
Okay, great. Now I understand, and I've used them with multiple people, so I know it works. But there's a requirement that you have a Google login.
No, so with the Google Drive, you can set up the editing permissions that anybody with the URL can edit it.
Okay.
So anybody should be able to click on the link. What you do is sort of in
Is it really wide open? Anyone can edit it? Okay.
Yeah.
Or do you have to actually say, Gordon can edit it and fill in the
Yeah, so I would set the permissions to say that anybody with the URL can edit that document,
Okay.
and I would drop the link in the chat during the meeting, and I would say, everybody please take a minute, click on the link, and it should open up to you.
Okay.
And then, right, and so what it would do is, if you don't have a Google account, then obviously, as you're typing, it's not going to show your name or anything like that. It's just the anonymous person who's writing this.
Okay. So and that leads to the question about refining the ideas. I wasn't quite sure if you were talking about doing that during the first session or having a committee or to the second session to do the refinement.
So, and this is really where the select board, this is up to your decision. So in the first meeting, I'm envisioning it's helpful, as we're talking about ideas, I can ask the crowd, okay, so does anybody know, typically, like, somebody, for example, brings up an infrastructure project, okay, when does that need to get done? What's the level of urgency of that, and try to get some information about that. Does anybody have any cost estimates around that, or maybe a cost estimates of a similar project that you can sort of consider comparable? That sort of stuff, I can gather that and sort of record it in the notes of each, but there might be a question that we can't answer at the moment. And so I'm thinking in those particular cases, I could ask the person who brought that idea forward, or maybe the person in the room who's most likely to have that information, if we can follow up after the meeting. And so I would just sort of pursue those conversations offline, and then in the second meeting, that's where we can sort of report back from those conversations that happened offline. So, okay, these are the ideas that were presented, this is the extra information that we gathered. And in terms of, so yes, in terms of like refining, gathering more information, that's sort of how I can imagine things flowing. If refining means like actually, you know, deciding evaluation criteria or ranking projects or voting projects on projects, then I would imagine that if that's something you'd like to do in the two public meetings, in the first meeting, it would really be about, okay, what are the evaluation criteria you want to use? Nobody's making any decisions, but what are the kinds of things we should be considering? Which of those criteria are more important than others? And then we might come to the second meeting with a proposed ranking sort of schematic, a proposed ranking for the various criteria. And say, okay, how do you feel about this particular proposal? This is reflect your ideas of the weight, of the different weights of the different criteria. Is this appropriately weighted? And then we might go ahead and do some voting.
Okay, you answered two of my questions right there. That's it. I am worried about January 10th. You point out very good as far as it's holiday time, and I'm not sure how paying attention people will pay, but we certainly don't want to let it slip too much.
Curtis, do you have something?
Yeah, I have a question, and I think it's my same question from last time. And I know you weren't here, Sarah, but it was what inspired the warning discussion. And I think one of the things I would be worried about, well, one of the things I thought would be really valuable about having this sort of broader listening session is that members of the community would be empowered to communicate what is important to them. And those things might not be things that we think of. And the weight on those things might be really different than we would put on them. And I don't know if that means that we should decide in accordance with the public view. It's a balancing act, but I'm worried that if it's a warned select board meeting, that changes the power dynamics in a way that is going to make it more difficult for people to volunteer sort of their own thoughts and ideas. So I wonder what you think about that, Sarah.
So I think from a logistical standpoint, if you have a quorum of select board members in attendance at this meeting, then open meeting law will apply. And it has to be warned as a select board meeting because of the nature of what we're discussing. Ultimately, the select board has the decision-making power over how to spend these funds. The input that's being collected is going to directly inform the decision-making. And so, yeah, that's something to consider. If the select board only wants to send one representative to that meeting, and then therefore it's not technically a select board meeting and it's not warned as such, that if you feel that would change the dynamics according to your knowledge of your town and experience of what works and what doesn't work, then that would be your decision. I guess, you know, the only, I can sort of counsel you on the logistics of it. It really depends on what you've experienced in town conversations. And if you feel like dialogue is less forthcoming when you've got a full select board panel present, then, perhaps that's a good idea to go ahead and make it a more informal meeting. I think it really depends on the dynamics of your community. I've certainly seen some very lively select board meetings across the region where folks are very engaged. And if you're concerned about specific dynamics there, we can sort of lay some ground rules. If, for example, you're going to have the full select board present and you're going to warn it as a select board meeting, but you're concerned that folks aren't feeling comfortable to speak, we can sort of lay some ground rules at the beginning to manage folks' expectations, to say, we are willing to listen to any and all comments about this and to help them feel more comfortable. Also, the presence of a Google Doc where folks can directly type in their comments, even anonymously, can really help encourage folks to participate more. Does that answer your question, Will?
Yeah, and based on that answer, I would just say to my colleagues that I'll go with whatever option you think is best, and I'm happy to, if we need to avoid a quorum, I'm happy to be one of the people who doesn't attend, and I'll watch the recording afterward. That's no problem for me. So whatever everyone else thinks, I'm happy to go with that. But one thing I do know is that we had a lot of success with these community breakfasts in the past, and they gave us a lot of ideas, and they helped move a lot of things that we've implemented since then forward. And I wonder if part of the value of those forums was that they were less formal and had sort of less explicit power built into them. So once again, I'm willing to go with whatever the rest of you think. I just think that that might be a useful consideration.
Sarah,
I would like to speak to that.
no, go ahead.
I want to speak to that. Curtis, I'm not sure where you're coming from in thinking that people would be intimidated by the select board is there. Select board is at every single town meeting. No one has trouble speaking. There's lively dialogues throughout the meeting. We're also elected by the residents here. Why would they be intimidated by us? There's 5 of us. We're probably the least intimidating board in the Upper Valley. Okay, so I will be at these meetings because, as select board, as Sarah said, we have to make these decisions on these projects. I can't get enough information about this stuff. I want to be at these meetings. I want to hear what people have to say and get Sarah's feedback. Yes, this will work. No, that won't. So I think this is an unfounded, unnecessary concern on your part. When you mentioned community breakfast, yes, that was valuable, but I have never seen a meeting where people are afraid to speak, and there's no reason to. So, thank you.
I agree with Mary completely. We've had a couple of examples, even our latest about Town Road 8, and we had that meeting at the library a couple of years ago. People love to voice their opinions, and in front of a board, it doesn't intimidate them at least, as far as I can see.
In fact, in some issues, I wish people were intimidated, but they're not. Like the dogs, right? So I don't think we have to worry about it.
So a similar select board involvement sort of discussion. How do we present ideas, or should we not? Oh, and part 2 is could you talk a little bit about the actual physical meeting? Who would be in the room and who would be remote and so on? Thanks.
So in terms of presenting ideas, if you're warning this as your meeting, then I think it's appropriate for select board members to introduce any ideas that they have, not as, to sort of caveat them, to say this is not something that is definitely what we're considering. This is just one idea among all the ideas in the community. We haven't ranked it yet. We're not favoring it in any way. But we're putting it out there to get reflections, to get community feedback on this particular thought. And so if you're sort of treating each idea that a select board member puts forward in the same way that you're treating any idea a community member puts forward, I think that sort of builds the equity piece of it. In terms of the physical setup, I would need to be able to be at a computer so that I am able to see what folks are typing into a Google document, or I can I'll be transcribing. And I can check what's going into the chat, that sort of thing. So I could do it remotely, or I could do it here. If it's easier, just logistically for setup for all the sort of administrators to be present in one place, then I'm of course happy to be part of the crew that's here on board. I think that, we don't need to have a whole bunch of people in a room physically to make this work, right? So if all the select board members even wanted to attend remotely, I think that would be fine, because you're just going to have a large group of people online. And then the folks who are in the room, obviously, they're going to need to be able to hear everything that's going on and see everything that's going on, right? So because if there's stuff going in on the chat, and the stuff that I'm writing into our notes document, that sort of thing. So, it's going to be challenging because we need to project. I don't know if that can serve as a projection screen, but we need to project probably from my computer onto a screen so that the folks in the room can see. If nobody attends in person from the community, then we can all just sort of be focused on our laptops, and that would certainly be the easiest possible scenario.
Maybe you could borrow a smart board.
So Two Rivers has small projection screens, certainly nothing like that, which we brought to meetings along with a projector and, a laptop, and I just sort of operate on that small scale, if that can be helpful for the people who are.
Perhaps we should have a recorder so that your head is not on, your fingers are not on the keyboard and your head's on what's being entered, but actually have a second person so that you can be available for continuing.
If you have enough folks to assist with that, that would be much appreciated. And if not, that's totally fine. I understand. I've done it all, juggled it all in the past. And of course, we would be recording, so I would be able to go back and review the recording and catch anything I missed.
Curtis, do you have any questions, or Martha? For Sarah?
No, I feel pretty good about it and feel like we have a good idea of what to do going forward.
Okay, so maybe we should decide on dates. Sarah's available for those 4 dates, so let's knock 2 of them out, and then you'll know. Curtis, do you have a preference?
No.
Okay. Martha? If Martha's.
I don't have a preference, but I think Sarah's point about the holiday maybe is a good one. A little bit away from the holiday might be better.
Okay, so what were those 2 later dates?
The dates are January 10, 13, 24, and 27.
All right, so given what Martha has to say, you want to go with the 2 later ones? Okay, Bill?
I think we should, but should there be, that may be too close if we need to, like, where does this committee kick in between the meetings?
So my understanding was that meeting one would be either January 10th or January 13th, and then meeting two would be January 24th or January 27th. Do I have that wrong?
You're correct.
Okay,
I think what we're now beginning to do is slide it a little bit more, but
okay.
Oh, so we'll have, so how about the 13th? That's,
I think
2
that makes
weeks.
sense, yeah.
okay.
About,
So.
how about the
13th?
13th and the 27th?
Yeah. Okay. Is everybody good with that?
just
What time of the evening would you like this to be at?
I don't know, I was thinking like 10 o'clock. Eddie,
I'll bring
okay,
my coffee.
yeah. How about, well, I mean, this usually works for us, 5:30, I don't know, everybody else. Maybe we should have it later so people get to eat, I don't know. Let's,
perhaps a little bit later.
just because if the meeting goes for a couple hours, you don't want people falling over. I'm hungry,
Like 6:30 to 8:30?
yeah.
Sure. I think something like that would be good.
Gordon,
Mhm.
okay, Curtis, what do you think? Okay, Martha?
Did you say 6:30?
Yeah.
I couldn't hear what you said.
6:30.
6:30 sounds good.
Sarah, you mentioned that we should formalize the expectations of the committee. Do possibly you have any outlines from other towns that you've engaged with that could help us with that?
Yes, so I do have an example from another town, so I will pass that on to Dave.
Okay.
And I will also work with Dave following this meeting to develop a draft agenda. And if you would like assistance with outreach, drafting outreach messaging as well, we can work together.
Right, and I was specifically talking about the expectations for the
The
subcommittee.
committee, right? Yep, absolutely. I have an example to share.
Okay, I think we can wrap this topic up.
I'm excited.
Thank you, Sarah, very much. You're most welcome to stay for the budget discussion if you'd like. No? Okay. All right, now, as I said, thank you very much, Sarah, for your time and effort. And now we're going on to new business. The Mill Street Bridge update. We're going to have a discussion, we're going to take action, and Dave is going to walk us through this.
Larry, I'll make this pretty quick. So last Wednesday, we did an assessment on the bridge. It's simply what we did is the intent to see the amount of rod that was on the bridge. To our delight, there was no rod on any of the beams. I think with the 4 beams, so the rod is just to the decking. And I would say it's maybe a 15 by 15 foot square, or that's kind of a guesstimate, but the amount of decking that we're going to need to replace. So the bad news is we still don't have a timeline as to when we're going to get in there and do the work and finish that up. But it's a much quicker timeline than what we were expecting had there been any beams to the beams. So the difference is, winter, spring versus summer, fall. If it was a bigger project, we thought that we were going to have to go back and do some engineering design work, put it up to bid, find a contractor to, come in outside of Miller Construction that's already done, the assessment for us. But it's a much, much easier project. So that's the update. Unfortunately, I still have a date when this will be completed by. A lot of this is going to be determined by when the materials can come in. Materials have been pretty much on back order, and this isn't just something that we're going to grab from Britton's and bring it over to the Mill Street Bridge. What we plan on doing is to continue with Miller Construction because it is not a anything outside of, the scope of the 15 by 15 foot decking. Miller Construction brought in the steel plate for us, both on this project and for the Mace Hill project back, that ended up going out to bid and went to somebody else. But they came in on kind of an emergency basis and did the assessment for us. They put in the gate that needed to be put in order for us to do the assessment, which is up by the Greater Rutland Valley Solid Waste District composting facility and by the Twin State quarry itself. We needed to do that. We ourselves were at that point incapable of finding someone just due to the time of the year. Miller Construction was able to put that in so that we could move this forward in a timely manner. We have also been blessed by District 4 and Vermont Agency of Transportation, where we have gotten some basic design drawings on the work that needs to be done and the materials that need to be used and the quantities that need to be used. We will also get basically an estimated cost basis to use on this. So it'll help keep Miller in line, there should be no gouging involved. But the difference here is by going with Miller Construction, they are familiar with the project, they've been there, whatever materials are there, such as the Jersey barriers, that have closed the bridge, etc. They're ready to go. They've got people in place that can do this. They're just basically waiting for us to say, yeah, go ahead, Miller, go ahead and do this, and they'll turn around and they'll order the materials. Allows us to open up things quicker, get Mill Street residents back much faster than if we gotta go back to the drawing board and go back with somebody else. That's would be separate. At the end of the day, it's not an overly complex project at this point. It's fairly simplistic, so it makes some sense. But I just wanted to put that out there, make sure that I answered any questions on this, any concerns about going with Miller, and otherwise I'd like to proceed with them. They've seen the design and the matter of getting the materials in and moving forward.
So property required to be
Two things. So the state of Vermont, where we're getting a good part of our money, is not requiring us to do this because it's an emergency situation. And our own policy basically states that if it is an urgent situation, that you can move forward without going through that process. So.
Regarding Miller, Dave, just to give us a little bit of a sense, what was their discrepancy on the Mace Hill bid? Do you remember?
I don't remember, to be honest with you. They weren't, there was a core group of like 3 that were all in the same ballpark between 132 and say 136, 137. We had 1 or 2 outliners up by 150 and 170. And then the one that ended up being the winning bid was just, lower than anybody else by a good margin. So they were clumped into the grouping. And again, we've got oversight on this by V-Trans, giving us the cost estimates. Before we move forward, Miller will give us pricing on the quantities and materials, and and we can move forward. To give you a ballpark idea, they were there for a good hunk of the day, but I think it cost us like, I don't think it was any more than $1,800 for the work, the assessment done on Wednesday. So this is, so far, this has been good for us. We're on a path to move forward, and depending on whether we pull in the items such as the gate and some of the other things, we got upwards to 30 grand, 28, 30 grand from the state of Vermont to help us with this. So far, I think we're in that number. I will just add that we need to do some further work in the spring. Not sure who would do this work. We need to, because part of the problem here on the rot is that there's a slight downward slope of the road, which basically drives the water into into the decking of the bridge. In speaking with the engineer and, you know, the supervisor over at District 4, they'd like us to grade that road, that portion of the road is dirt. Like us to grade it so it's a decline coming into the, decline going away from the bridge, an incline coming from north of the bridge towards the bridge, so the water would need to go uphill. And then possibly pave that patch. It would be about a 20-yard patch of pavement. District 4 is also going to give us support on that, and basically drawing out, you know, and I assume using grade stakes as to what the grade should be. So, you know, you'd have to bring it down an extra 4 inches as well to include the pavement. So, you know, that's kind of a part B to this that everybody still wants us to do, but that would be separate from the decking situation and most likely separate from north. I gotta say, as a town, we've been pretty lucky last summer with both Martinsville Road and Clay Hill Road. We got support on Martinsville Road from the state of Vermont, and so far they've stepped up with this project, and it's just made things much easier than not. At least, you know, the fact that nobody has any, you know, there's no dissent in, but if you'd like to make a motion, that would just solidify it for the grant purposes.
That we hire construction.
That we move forward with the construction to do the remaining part of the work.
Yes.
So Mary, I actually have 2 more questions, but they're not specifically about approving Miller.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, the first question is, Dave, do you think it would be possible to get anything, though of course at a much smaller scale, like the communication that VTrans sends you when there are bridge closures and that you forward on to the town?
So I'm not inclined to incorporate the entire town on this. It's been pretty specific to the 10 residents, town households, 9 households north of Mill Street Bridge. And we did send a mailing to them prior to the work done on Wednesday. And I anticipate communicating with them again. The problem here, Curtis, has been the big unknown. So I sent out a letter basically stating that the week of November 29th, we were going to be doing the work. And to be honest with you, that was a little bit of a crapshoot because what we were really waiting on was finalization of the agreement with Twin State. And that didn't get finalized until Tuesday morning, the 30th, leading into Wednesday, the 1st. So we were in a little bit of a squeeze there because we had Miller booked for Wednesday, the 1st, and no permission, at least on paper, to utilize Quarry Road from Twin State. And now, I mean, I think that there is some news for the residents of Mill Street that we've done the assessment, and the assessment is better than expected, which I think will go out to them. The key here is we still don't know when we are going to get back in to make that bridge better. So the only communication to be had at the moment is simply it's going to be sooner rather than much, much later. And at the moment, that's about as best that I can give them.
I think maybe giving some of the information about sort of like the possible extent the damage could have been and how much it actually was might be useful helping people put it in context who are impacted by the bridge closure. But some sort of communication would, I think, from the town directly to the residents would be really nice. And it might also be useful to put that communication up like at the North Hartland post office or something, just for general residents of the area if they're interested as well. And then my second question, I hope you don't hate me. I think I have to ask it. I'm obligated to ask it. So in this period of time, given that we know the extent of the damage and where it is, and we don't have a current timeline for repairing the damage, is there literally no possible conceivable way to allow for pedestrian traffic on that bridge?
We are not gonna open that bridge to pedestrian or vehicular traffic. I kind of hinted to you in an email that, you know, if something were to happen, that would be just an unforgivable situation for the town. One, to explain why we did that, and two, the ramifications towards the taxpayers in the town if something were to happen is just large. It's a broken bridge. People need to understand that. We've gone through 3 months in great pains to make the detour. It's not ideal. It's narrow. It can be, but fortunately for everybody involved, we can, reach town, we can reach village. People can get to and from work. They can get groceries. They can get medical supplies, and the bus doesn't go all the way, but it does go to Dale's mobile home, 2 miles away. So I could think of or envision a worst case scenario of a dead end street on the north end of 2 covered bridges if they didn't have an alternative way out.
Well, I hope you know that I had to ask the question, and I think your response is great. So thank you.
Go ahead.
My only complaint about the bridge being built, we have a business on that road. And my husband is not getting any customers because they don't know how to get there. He's got a lot of customers from White River, that there's no sign coming down Route 5 South stating, turn on Quarry Road for detour. There's one coming out of North Hartland, but there's not one going down for it. That's his livelihood, but that's how we make our money. If we can't get our customers there, it's only hurting us, they hurting anybody else.
So I'm certainly sympathetic to that.
You guys want to pay our, his salary while this is happening?
Well, let's let Dave answer, please.
The only thing I can say is that what we're utilizing to get people in and out is not a public road, it's a private road. We had very strict in order to use that, we had to put things in and to abide by certain things that were very strict, more stricter than a public road would be. One of them was to have minimal signing and to, they don't want anyone other than really Mill Street residents utilizing Quarry Road. So the signage that we've got on that road is, if you, were to travel on Mill Street, you realize that there is a detour. They certainly do not want all of Route 5 traffic knowing that Quarry Road is a road open to Mill Street, unfortunately.
So what are we supposed to do about our livelihood?
Do you have a way to contact your customers and give them directions?
It's good, when they call, but we have people that cars go down, that haulers have to come in to drop their cars off.
Do you have a way to contact those haulers? Do you know who your haulers are?
No, you never know who it is.
So there are stray haulers that you've never dealt with that come to your place?
Correct.
Well, that's tough. I will say that all of us here, if we live on a dirt road or even a paved road, have had to deal with closure.
We don't know how long it's going to be closed for.
Right.
You want us to go bankrupt? That's what's going to happen.
I don't think anybody here would advocate for you to go bankrupt. So I think we need to back away from that and just figure out a solution. So that's why I'm asking if you have a way to contact your.
So far, he's actually drove himself out, gone to the other person's rigs, brought them down in, worked on, brings them back. You can't do that to everybody's rigs. And granted, he's only open 3 days, and the man's gonna die here shortly. He needs a bank transplant. So what little bit of income we got coming in would definitely help us.
I definitely, and I think everybody here hears your frustration. You're in a tough spot. So, again, I think we've heard your frustration. Now we need to think about solutions. So,
And I was just here to ask for sign, that's all
yeah,
a sign coming from Route 5 South. That's all I would like, that's what I'm here to ask for.
right, good. I think, we need to hash this over a day because as you said, Twin State was very reluctant to even let us use Quarry Road. And, as you said, it went down to the last minute before they signed the agreement. So we certainly don't want to upset them and have it closed to everybody. But there's got to be a way to work something out for your benefit.
And the other thing too is ambulances.
Right,
getting in there,
right.
because we definitely will probably have to have one before this is over.
So all fire and rescue is aware of the situation. It's been converted on 911. So 911, Hartford Dispatch, everybody's aware from a first responder point of view that in order to access Mill Street north of those two bridges, they need to access Quarry Road, and they're prepared for that.
Well, and it's also told, once the bridge gets fixed, that they'll never ever be able to have an ambulance across it, or they're gonna have to use that other road. How is that gonna work?
So interestingly enough, it has always been a 10,000 pound weight limit, so nothing has really changed. The smartest thing for everyone is to start thinking about, what to do about that. It forever has been 10,000 pound weight limit. People on north of Mill Street have just simply chosen not to pay attention to that. It's a bridge that, is 1879 or something to that effect. It certainly looked pretty solid when we opened it up. But there are some heavy machinery, including ours, that we now need to detour through Quarry Road. Septic tank trucks, et cetera, will need to call and make a provision with Twin State to go that way once we go back to normalcy. But, people need to understand that, the bridge just isn't meant for, certain traffic that we use every day today. And I think that the residents are gonna need to think that through a little bit. We can't come up with, I've spoken to engineers, it's almost virtually impossible to upgrade that bridge to a point where you get more than that, perhaps maybe 16,000 pounds, but we're still looking at, excluding, some major trucks.
So in other words, it's kind of like subsidying you at the north end of that bridge.
At the moment, I'm taking one step at a time.
So my selling point, I wouldn't be able to sell my house because of all this issue right now that's going on. Correct?
All I know is last Wednesday, we didn't know what the issue was with the bridge. I know more today than I knew last Wednesday. And what I do know is I can move forward with someone to put it back together. But to be honest, residents that have been on that side of the bridge, and, I'm being a little bit honest here, but I think that honesty is not a bad thing in this situation, is that, look, it's a 10,000 pound bridge. Whatever's been going on over the past 25 years, we and the residents need to consider, that, and it's going to be an inconvenience. But, communication will need to be made by the company that you're dealing with to get and go around by Twin State and go that route. In order to live life like we do today, taking septic trucks and
I
stuff
don't
like
mind
that.
all that because it's like once a meeting, you gotta get order, you gotta get
Yeah,
whatever. It's just that right now, the situation is that's our level. And if I can't get business there, what are we gonna do? How are my bills gonna get paid?
again, it's not the answer everybody wants to hear, but some can. It's certainly a better situation than if we didn't or weren't able to make the detour that we did. You know, there would be, I'm not sure what the answer would have been then at that point. So at the moment, you know, some is better than nothing. It's certainly not better than what we're accustomed to, but it's, you know, drivable at the moment until we can get this to a better place. And hopefully materials can be had, and we're looking at, you know, weeks, something like January, February, rather than, again, it could have been late summer, fall of next year. You know, if we had to go back and design this and you know, pull this apart to put a beam in, et cetera, it would have been extremely difficult.
Do we have your email address?
I've never been emailed, so I don't know.
Okay, would you leave your email, okay, with Dave, so that, we can contact you that way, because I think there's got to be some solutions for you, because you are in a really tough spot, and, there should be something we can think of, maybe not immediately, like right off the top of my head, but, I would like to think that we could certainly try, because, you know, if I were to lose my livelihood, I would be devastated. So I can see where you're coming from. And I'm glad you came in. We'll have to just see what we can do. That's all I can tell you tonight. I don't know what else to say tonight. Oh, thanks, Susan. Okay, thank you.
Could
Okay.
I do a motion, Mary?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so I move that we allow Miller Construction to be awarded a no bid contract for the repair of the Mill Street Bridge, given the urgent nature of the situation.
Give a second. Bill second. Any discussion? Martha? Okay, no discussion, and I think we are all in favor of the motion.
Yes.
Okay. Martha, you in favor? You're muted. Oh, Martha has a fever. She may have just gone to bed. So anyway, the majority is that the motion passes. Okay, we are now on to the next order of new business, which is fiscal year 23 budget discussion, which will be led by Dee.
Yeah, give me my power up, my equipment bills.
We have been taking much time with technology tonight, so go ahead. Okay, I'll get first. Yeah.
So I think my staff bumbled something about a Patriots Bills game at 8:18 tonight, so we'll try I'm trying to move this along.
The staff or you, Dave?
There might be a combination of the two. And usually I come with like 4 or 5 sheets of paper, and I have one tonight. So hopefully this does move along. We do have some sophisticated things to talk about here. However, at the end of the day, this year's budget is fairly simplistic compared to some of the things that we went into last year or the years prior. So what we have here is the general fund. I'm going to talk general fund, and then I'm going to talk highway fund. And the predominant issue, and there's always an issue, there's always kind of a story to a budget. And this year's story simply is inflation. Okay, first and foremost, I'm going to start with employee wages. What we have done since I've been here, this is my 5th or 6th budget now, is we look at the New England CPI, it's a consumer price index. It rates inflation in specific, the Northeast region. For instance, last year it was a humble 0.8. This year it is 4.6. And so we're looking at, we use that for basically cost of a living adjustments for the staff. So off the top, you're looking at a 4.6% increase for wages and staff. Again, last year was 0.8. And the year before might have been 1 point something, and the year before that was 2 point something. If anybody's been following the news, inflation has been on the rise. A little bit of a stall now that the new variants are coming out. But again, as we pull out of the pandemic, if we are to continue to pull out of it, this is an issue. The second item is fuel. And for heating fuel, I've got a 20% increase kind of across the board, with an exception of one of the buildings that was kind of high to begin with. But I essentially kind of looked at that, and we made a 20% increase. In tonight's warrants, you had a couple urban fuel bills, and both for the heating fuel and for the propane, it averages to be about $1 above last year, $1 per gallon above last year. So already we're seeing that. That's for this fiscal year. If it continues on this trend or stays steady, for next fiscal year, we are going to experience those increases. We don't have those increases this year. So when you look down on the expense side of this, and you see some, 15% increases, on Martin Memorial Building, and a couple other ones that look big. Some of those areas are simply heating fuel, increase, and we're talking a couple $100 just because the expenses on those line items tend to be smaller than bigger. So that's what we're looking overall. It affects the general fund and it affects the highway fund. Specific to the general fund, I'm giving away the show here. I've highlighted some of the bigger movers in this year's general fund. I'll get into the specific areas in a moment, but I'll spend some time just from a broad reach. Assessments are basically our loans and our yearly contracts, such as state police, ambulance, and some of those items. This year, there's a $19,000 increase in there for the Three Corners intersection project. It will be the first, if this continues to go forward on the pace that it is. It'll be our first payment, which is primarily interest. The following years, and I do have a debt schedule towards the end of the discussion here, obviously increases before it decreases, but we start with a $19,000 number for this year. We had a similar number budgeted last year, but as we were getting ready to adopt the budget, we knew that the project wasn't going to go to completion or to construction this past summer. So we took it out. So this shouldn't be too much of a surprise to us, but it's there. The town clerk's budget, 13%. It's like, whoa, what's Brian doing over there? Again, remember, roughly 4.6, close to a 5% increase for wages. By the way, I'll just mention that health insurance stayed the same, actually went down slightly, but we still have an increase budgeted for next fiscal year because we're not sure what that's going to bring. But for this fiscal year, it stayed down. What we're seeing on the town clerk's side is essentially if the pandemic stays as it is, and we need to do an Australian ballot again, there was a fair amount of expense to that. We had to put out a mailer, we had to do communication, we had to re-gate the ballot box to read the special, additional items that we had on there. So we put a lot of those expenses back on there. However, on the revenue side, there's an offset to most of that because in looking at the ARPA language, certainly why we would be doing that would be to keep people out of the building. Again, for whatever reason, we don't have town meeting day, and I'm not, advocating it, but again, variants are acting up. You were essentially keeping people out of the building. It's pandemic related. You're trying to keep people safe. And certainly that's what the ARPA money is all about. There's actually provisions in there about communication and capital money for buildings and stuff to prevent or to keep people away. So on the revenue side, we have an offset to that. Ordinance administration and planning, Phil, is not all of the increase, but the mapping software that we talked about earlier is a part of that increase that you see there. Again, it says 10%, 11%, but we're looking at basically a $6,000, $5,200 increase. On the general side, the big thing, and I'm not even going to say it's all that big, the addition to the general fund is under buildings and grounds. And what we're looking at doing is adding a summer maintenance person, summer only, it's not full time. There's $12,000 budgeted for a summer person. And what we're running into, well, let me go back. What we're not covering and what Timmy Pierce doesn't cover as far as mowing the lawns is any maintenance that we want to do over at Summers Falls. And again, Rob Anderegg has come to us with a Summers Falls management plan. Doesn't solve all the problems in the management plan, but it gets us over there. It gets us in there to do some cleanup, some removal of wood, kind of take a look at that beachfront, kind of keep that in good graces. And the other thing that this does is it allows us to mow the cemeteries without using our buildings person. And it allows us to do that more than 3 times a year. So right now, going into Memorial Day, going into the 4th of July, and then again, right at about Labor Day, we need to go off and we need to take care of the cemeteries. And again, and particularly in May, as we're ramping up and we're trying to do, the buildings and grounds person has a fair amount of, buildings and the immediate vicinity for grounds in May and June. And we go out for 2 weeks and we mow the cemeteries. And again, we only mow it 3 times. We think that 5 times is probably more adequate. There's certainly times that we go by and it's probably knee high. The cemetery folks have kind of tried to uncle a little bit on us. And we weren't looking to them to mow it anyways, but we had our buildings and grounds person that at the time was Evan, and Evan was going off and he was mowing these. And again, we lose them for basically 6 weeks out of the summer. This was roughly close to 2 weeks every time we went off and did it. So we're looking at picking up the cemeteries, we're looking at picking up Summers Falls, and we're also looking at picking up some additional maintenance over at the North Hartland playground. That's kind of out of sight, out of mind, and we're looking at doing a little bit of work in Foster Meadows Fields, including the pathways that kind of run along Wells Brook. A lot of times I had to send Timmy in there Timmy Pearson to cut the wood and you know, clean up something if someone called. And again, that's kind of an additional expense out of Timmy. And something that we could probably upkeep on just a regular basis anyway. So we're looking at kind of multiples of things there that would kind of work in conjunction with the buildings and grounds person, but also have his own responsibilities as well. Last two things here, real quick. Grants, you see $5,000 there. That is the local share of the rec center ADA grant that we're looking to do. It's a $50,000 planning grant to essentially outline and put into place what we need to do over there and give us a better estimate, give us some preliminary drawings. You know, that shouldn't be too far removed from your memories as to, we've still got that hanging out there. But again, we need a local component to that, and that's the $5,000. Lastly, under miscellaneous, we make a jump from 6,500 to 12,000 simply because we're back to, we had prepaid for the fireworks a while back. We're back to paying them, and we will have expenses for the fireworks and other Old Home Day expenses in there. So you see the jump back to the $12,000. I was going to go to the individual kind of parts to that, but I think I covered that pretty good. So I'm just going to jump right now to the highway department and kind of highlight the big changes in the highway department. Oops. So the highway department, and I'm sorry, back on the general fund, I believe that ends up being a budgetary increase of 5.61%, I believe, to that general fund budget. I'm sorry, 5.59% increase. Ironically, what has been the biggest driver to our budget the last 5 years has been the highway department. And this is up 4.61%. So that's kind of down from where we've been. However, you'll see under administration, you'll see a minus 6.10% under administration. That's essentially due to health insurance, the turnover in health employees. Sometimes that's good for health insurance, sometimes it's not so good. We've had instances where new employees have full families and we end up paying the full family health benefit, which is upwards to $25,000. In this case, we had two come on that utilize just a single, which is more of a $7,500, $8,000 expense. So a big difference between the two. So you see the expenses coming down there. However, under summer maintenance, you see a jump, and that is primarily again in I'm going to show this one individually, but the big jump is essentially in private contracting and culverts again this year. And then under total paving and resurfacing, you see the jump from 170 grand to 200 grand. Again, we've been eyeing that $200,000 number. I'll just point out that this has been kind of a long road. It's been a goal of ours. It's been a goal of the roads committee, but we went from 80 grand to the $200,000 mark. So that's driving us again this year. But it's been a goal of ours. And again, you're probably sick of hearing this, but it's kind of, something that we did to ourselves because we went 10 to 12 years at that $80,000 number. and we never incrementally increased it. So you've seen some pretty big incrementals over the past 5 years to get to where we need to go. I'll just explain what I did under summer maintenance. And what I did is before the grants and aid projects, which is basically ditching, has been a part of subcontracting. It's been a part of our culvert number, and it's been a part of our stone number. And at first, I kind of liked that. I could see the different materials used. It was offset by grants and aid revenue on the other side. However, as time has gone on, we have used and we continue to need to use in greater amounts the subcontracting and particularly stone. So I've pulled the grants and aid out, and I've given that its own line item right here. So that's a $21,875 line item. However, it is offset by $17,500 on the revenue side. However, what's different here, what's different here is before that grants and aid revenue essentially went against subcontracting and stone and culverts. I did back subcontracting off from 35 to 25, knowing that we probably got at least 10,000 of that wrapped up in this number here. However, I kept the culverts and the stone number the same, because we're actually utilizing that much stone and that much culverts. So it's an increase by what I did there. It's an increase of about a little over $11,000. It takes a little bit of that explanation to let you know what's going on, but that's what I did. So again, highway is a 4.61% increase. That is good for us. What that does for the highway tax rate, because our expenses are increasing greater than the revenue that we take in, you'll see a tax rate of 5.11% for the highway, which is more than the actual increase in expenses. We have been lucky in the past couple of years. We have gotten, actually more like last year, we got more in state aid revenue than we expected. I'm not sure that that's going to happen again this year. So that helped us, but again, we're not budgeting for anything like that because we won't know until it comes down the pipe. But that's why you see a different number for the increase in taxes versus the actual tax rate. So combined, as I said, 5.59% increase for general fund, 4.61% for highway. We're looking at about under a 5.2%, basically 5.17% increase, which is in line with what we're seeing for inflation at the moment. What does that mean for a tax rate? Gives you a 5.49% increase. Unfortunately, again, the revenues aren't there to grow as much as some of our expenses. So you're going to see a tax rate that is a little bit bigger than what the actual budget increase is. However, combined debt on a $250,000 house is about $80. Now, I'm going to just spend a few moments Yeah, if I can find it. So anyway, as I'm looking for this, capital projects, last year we budgeted 35,000, although maybe 4,500 was earmarked for the library HVAC system. This year, it's about a $37,000 budget number, 37.5, maybe if I can find it here. Here it is right here. 37.5. It's a small increase. It's only $2,500. However, there is a little bit of a difference. You know, I've got for the activity center again, and we have the floors, which we're in the middle of looking at doing right now. The $25,000 is for a roof over there, and the shingles are blowing off as we speak. And the $12,500 is for the Damon Hall steps. We may be able to get that in this budget year, but based upon demand and availability, it's a good chance that we can't. So that's what the $12,500 is for. What kind of drops out of the picture is money earmarked for the library HVAC system. But that 4,250 along with this 8,500 over here gives us about 12,750 plus or minus that we've got earmarked for the HVAC system if everything goes according to plan. And it's a potential ARPA project, but you know, there is money there, but to kind of keep things in line and to, you know, keep it manageable from a budget perspective, I've included these two and I've dropped the HVAC from this, knowing that we can continue to put money away next year or in future years. What you don't see on the general fund capital projects or capital improvements, we got two fairly good sized projects or things that need attention. And we're going to tackle these more in depth on December 20th select board meeting. But one is the walking path that we have talked about on and off now for probably close to a year. Last, I gave you an update. John Leonard has put together an RFP for that. You don't see it here. There is money in a reserve account for this. We depleted a little bit with the North Hartland fence for the tennis courts, but there is money to transfer in again. And I would reiterate that this is money that John has gone out and almost worked independently to bring in. We received, I don't know, what it was 40 grand last year in grant money. 43 money in grant money last year that we ended up putting towards essentially programs and rec equipment. And again, I mentioned this during budget season, but I'll bring it up again. He does volunteer over at the Woodstock Covered Bridge Half Marathon. And in return, not only because he volunteers, but because they like John and our programs, they donate a fairly substantial amount of money to us on a yearly basis, or it has been. They weren't able to do it last year, but they were able to do it this year. And we use that money mostly for scholarships, but the amount that they gave us this year can be used for, we can put to make up the gap on the rec walking path. And again, we'll address this in more detail on the 20th, but I certainly want to let you know that this is part of the capital improvement picture. And another thing that we got coming down the pike is not a capital improvement, but certainly is a focus of Stacy and myself. But we have gotten the expiration of a contract with our largest hydro dam in North Hartland. this contract's been in existence, I think, for maybe 15 years. We gave it an assessed value 2 years ago, or at about the time of the reappraisal. We are looking at bringing in a special group or a special assessor to help us come up with a proper assessment for that property. And the latest person that she talked to, if the latest proposal include not only that, but the dam out at underneath the two bridges in North Hartland and the J. Valeri Dam or dams. We could potentially pick those up for appraisals as well. Wide fluctuation on this, between maybe $14,000 and $30,000. Certainly 30 being on the higher end, 14 on the lower end. We also, though, get money from the state of Vermont for reappraisals. We used it for our last reappraisal. We do have money in the reappraisal fund. We would look at pulling that money out of a reappraisal fund. Certainly the 14 would be healthier for us, although we have spoken about the $30,000 number. It will deplete us probably a little bit to the point where our next reappraisal, whether the exact amount is in there or not, but we're maybe 2 years away from the next reappraisal. We get maybe $14,500 from the state of Vermont for the appraisal fund each year. So that'll boost it up maybe another 30 grand. So I think that puts us in a pretty good spot for the next reappraisal, what that expense would be. So we think we've got room for both in there. The other thing I'll mention is we do have, and we've been on this trajectory for a little bit now. If you recall, we were having some real budgetary problems with the general fund. We ended up solving that. But at the time when we had to cut back on some of our amounts that we put in, you'll see here we were cruising along prior to 2019. Like 2017, we were putting 50 grand into the fire department capital reserve for their future purchases. We cut that to 25, and then we've been slowly building this back up, 37, 49, 61. Well, we're back up to where we want to be now at 65, and we need to go to 65 because we lost ground back here. But kind of like our highway department, we didn't do this overnight. We've been building it back up. 65 is where we want to be. And I'm just going to take a moment to refresh everybody's memory here. We do have, actually, I should say, John has a pretty good plan for his equipment. And he had actually a forestry truck for fiscal year 23, which is the one that we're budgeting for now. In talking with him, it's most likely he is going to put this as an article this spring to purchase this forestry truck. Again, the dollar amount is in or around 150 grand. It's gonna bring him, stop. Now I got it. It's gonna bring him, basically bring him down to close to 30 grand, 20 grand, depending on the final price amount. But he doesn't have another purchase again until 2028. So whether it's this year or this spring, provided he doesn't chew up past that 185, he should be in pretty good shape going down the pike. Again, however, we're looking at this 65 number to get us to where we want to go by 2028. And that leaves him a little bit of a buffer in case something happens in the meantime.
Dave,
Yep.
what's a forestry truck exactly used for?
Forest fire. Brush fire truck, wheel drive truck with small tank and small.
Thank you, Martin.
Bill?
I know, but you said forest fires.
The community gallery over here.
Yeah.
That would seem like the obvious answer to
But
me.
I knew it wasn't the answer.
So when your cows are having a little bonfire, they can get up there and help them out.
Okay, thank you.
So last year, we bumped the equipment fund, the amount that we put in. Actually, we don't put it all into the equipment fund like we used to. We basically expense, and actually I'll go to it real quick. But we bumped the equipment fund up to $312,000 a year last year. And we feel pretty comfortable with that. Let's see it. There it is. So, this is, we do budget what we think we're gonna spend for maintenance, supplies, maintenance, just to give you some ideas of the numbers that we're looking at. We're looking at fuel. I didn't raise this too much because we've been kind of hovering a little bit below that number. Tires, parts, chains, so it's a pretty considerable chunk of change to run the machinery that we do. This is a loan for the bucket loader. We're in the second year. We're actually in the first year this year, but next year we're in the second year. So out of the $312,000, once you factor in what we think we're going to spend on, daily, weekly, monthly maintenance expenses, we think we're going to end up with about $155,693 to transfer to the equipment fund. So we do track this, and so I have got the $155,693 as an expected, and again, that's anticipated revenue coming into this. And we will end up having, this $200,000 is the six-wheel dump truck that we use. It's a four-wheel drive truck. We use it out on Creekpot Road and Densmore and just real difficult places that you can't get a 10-wheel truck. But again, it's hilly and you need that four-wheel drive. We probably won't go with the exact model that we have had in the past. You may recall that we have an issue with the front axle on this vehicle, but that's what we plan on expending. That is next fiscal year. In the meantime, Bill is working on an RFP. This $130,000 there is for a six-wheel dump truck that presently Doug uses. That is an international Freightliner. I have Freightliner, but in discussions with Martin, I told him it was a international. I thought it was, but either way, this is a replacement to one of our older vehicles. This is the buildings and grounds pickup truck that we just purchased and got in August. It ended up falling in this fiscal year. We originally had it budgeted here, but you can see that the fund balance, in 2025, we get pretty low, down to 65. Again, around that point in time, we're going to be looking at swapping out our two 10-wheelers. We think that at this point, hopefully, being on a shorter rotation, our trade-in will be better than what it was in the past. And then we have the recreation vans as well. So we've kind of speeding up the rotation here, but the hope is to keep those expenses, those maintenance and supply expenses down. and to get a better trade-in. And since I've been here, you can see the success that we have had. Everything is with an X is what has been purchased in the last 5 years. So you can see that, you know, again, this is the Freightliner that we're talking about that needs to be purchased now, and then that 4-wheel drive, 6-wheel dump truck next fiscal year. I do have in here like 50 grand if it's possible. We've kind of talked casually on and off about a potential second grader, particularly in the springtime. I do have that in there. The calculations show that would be feasible, provided that it doesn't end up being, you know, 150 grand. But if it's somewhere in the $50,000 vicinity, it is in this capital project budget, and something that we've been talking about and certainly internally been considering for a fair amount of time. So I didn't quite clean this up as I should. This 4,000 really doesn't exist in fiscal year 22, so that's a little bit high. So we're still paying off the pumper fire truck that we did via a special town meeting when I first came on. We have a tanker truck that we're also paying off. The tanker truck, this is the final year. We got one more year on the pumper truck. We have got the bucket loader down here for a 5-year, it's actually a capital lease. However, we've got the Three Corners intersection project kicking in here. However, as we scroll this out, at this point in time anyways, oh, come on. Oh, it doesn't want to go, but anyway, we end up with that $71,230 something amount, and that is going into the conceivable future as a 20-year bond. It continues to decrease over the next 20 years, but until the point where we need to, you know, utilize a capital lease or to borrow something, after next fiscal year, when we go into fiscal year 2024, we've got the 2 loans, and then after 2026, we're down to the 1 bond. Again, provided that we don't purchase something else that we need to borrow for. The last thing I am going to talk about, it's a really important one. Fund balance. Fund balance is essentially money above and beyond the positive fund balance, essentially a surplus. This is in the highway fund. And when you look at that number, and you might be like, wow, $456,000 is an incredible amount of money to have on hand. Well, I should add that we had about $360,000 when I started. And we have cultivated this, and I haven't dug into this for a reason. And that is because next summer, we have the Three Corners intersection project. And our loan amount, we're capped. So if this goes over budget for any reason, and right now, materials are hard, materials are scarce, contractors are hard. Now, we did a pretty darn good job in estimating that project. There may be a little bit of a cushion in that estimate that we put together, and we have some grant money to go along with it. But if we go over, your options are slim. You can try and get a loan, but you gotta go to the voters for that. Okay? This is highway surplus, and it is highway monies, and it can be used for highway projects. And according to our lawyer, it can be used if there's an overage in the 3 corners intersection project. So that number is there for a pretty good reason. Second is if we don't need that much, or if we don't need any of it, we've got Clay Hill on the schedule to pave for next year. All of Clay Hill needs to be done. And right now, with the $200,000, we can do half of it if we're lucky. That money would allow us to do Clay Hill Road along with the guardrails that don't exist but are still there, along with some of the culverts that need to be replaced, and allow us to upgrade Clay Hill Road. That's only if we don't have an issue with 3 corners intersection and we've got all or some of that money kicking around. Now, I'll also state, and I did spend some time talking with the auditors, we also have positive fund balance in the general fund. And this is something important to think about, because the easy knee-jerk reaction is, get it back. Think about for a second, and we experienced this in the highway fund when we use surplus monies in the highway fund to keep the tax rate low. So let's just say general fund, the increase is 100 grand. Let's just say that $100,000 increase is 5%. Okay, so let's just say we take the surplus money, we say we're going to use 100 grand and put it towards the increase, wipe out the entire increase, so it's a 0% in the general fund. Taxpayers this year are going to be very happy because this year they have a lower tax rate. Next year I come along and I present same darn budget. It's a $100,000 increase, another 5% increase. Okay, we've got to get there at some point. So if we don't have surplus that year, it's a 10% increase to the voters. So eventually, that revenue goes away, your expenses are here, and you need to raise that money. So eventually, you've got to get there. So it's like hitting a pothole. Great this year, the following year, it's going to be a 10% increase to the voter, and it's going to sting because instead of kind of a nice smooth increase, it's going to be good and then a sharp one. Again, I need to get kind of some finality on this, but I did speak to the auditors and kind of email out to the lawyers. There's 2 things, and Phil and Spudge, I haven't given you any chance to mention it yet, but in the highway fund, there still is no provisions to fund the box culverts. And if you recall, during the roads committee, we were to build a reserve fund of $200,000 for box culverts.
Did not do last year.
We didn't do it last year because we got a fair amount of money that we're holding here of the taxpayers. So, it's a little bit of a balance here, why put it away? But, if we've got this, and we've got, I think, $58,000, it's either $48,000 or $58,000 in a bridge fund that somewhere along the way we stopped funding. And that's what we've got. And my understanding is that bridge fund was for the 3 covered bridges. I do understand that the Mill Street Bridge that we're looking at fixing as soon as possible is triage. It's got bigger problems. It's got 10 years of inspection reports to tell us what's wrong with it. We can put it on a list through Two Rivers, and hopefully get a priority from the state of Vermont. The state of Vermont may fund it or help fund it, or what happens this year, it crumbles before its time, and we need money to use, to fix it. So two big funds, and the other thing is I would leave room for, the Hurricane Irenes, the downturn that could come and wipe you out $500,000 in an instant. So what I think you should look at is leaving this highway fund balance exactly where it is. You got a big project coming, and you've got a whole lot of paving to make up. And if I understand what I heard today is correct, and the select board can do it, or you can put it to the voters, take your pick. You've got like 450 grand in the general fund. I would take maybe 225 of that and put it towards those reserve funds. And I would hold on to 200, 225 for just in case. It's going to fluctuate, it always does. This year we may be over budget. And it's going to use some of that surplus, or next year it's going to be under budget, and it adds to it, which means that you can continuously kind of, put to what your needs are until you feel secure enough to then give it back. And why is this a good idea? Because just like the paving, the 80,000 to 200,000, we have got to get to fill the $200,000 in this box culvert fund. And we need more than $58,000 in the bridge fund. So one, if you give all the money back, you're going to give them a bonus this year, but then the following year it's going to increase twofold. And then we still have to turn around and budget 10, 15, 20, $25,000 a year to build these funds up, which is just going to cost them in future years anyways. I don't think this money will get us completely to where we need to go. Certainly helps our cause, and if we do this, you'll see I originally had 10 grand in the bridge fund, just in case, to start adding to this. And I didn't even add to the box culvert. We can easily add another 25 grand from the highway fund, trying to build this back up. So instead of a 4.61% increase, we would have a 5.75. We've got some money. Visually, it looks like a lot of money, but let's be smart about this so that we don't give them the bonus, and then even worse, turn around and say, oops, we had no backup plan for a project that we spent too much. And we continuously put forth to those items that we know are going to need something at some point. That's it.
So Dave, I have a question. I don't see anything in the bridge line. There's nothing.
That's because I'm advocating you use some of your surplus monies to put to a bridge fund, specifically like 60 grand.
Okay, so you're just waiting. Okay.
So that's almost a different accounting mechanism as to how I would show that on the budget. But what I'm saying to you is that it's not on there right now. You're right. There's nothing on there for bridges. There's not anything on there for box culverts. You've got some things coming down the pike between a project and a whole lot of paving that we're behind on. Learning almost, Jay wanted to take out a loan. Remember that conversation and kind of catch us up on our paving. If we're secure in a 3/4 intersection project, we can speed up our paving, twofold with what we've got there. But it helps to have those places that we know, we've spent a lot of time talking about Jennyville Road and ARPA money. But we know there's a couple other box culverts out there. If we're prepared for it, you know, there's a 20%, which is maybe 25 grand, you know, of a $200,000 project, or, you know, 50 grand, you know, local share, but it always comes unplanned. So having that money available, state's been fantastic, but we don't know, you know, really, in any given, you know, project, whether we'll get state funding or we've got to rely on our own.
Does anybody have questions for Dave? Phil?
He answered one of them, which was about October. Last year, this year. Next is I just saw these numbers like you did, so I'm not really sure from that.
Curtis, do you have anything you want to ask?
I don't think I have any direct questions. It seems like if I could summarize in a short way, it seems like most of the increase in the budget this year would be driven by interest or inflation, the effect of inflation, and that there aren't very many new proposed line items or large expenses. Does that summary match, Dave, or have I missed something over here?
With an exception of the $30,000 bump in the paving, that's, you know, been telegraphed for a couple of years at this point. But, that's the biggest mover.
Yeah. Inflation sucks. Like we're gonna have to deal with it probably for a few years, at least would be my guess. But yeah, I don't know what the other option is. So it's a lot to think about, though, for sure.
Martha, are you, yep, do you have any
Yeah.
questions?
I'm still here and I do not have any questions.
Thank you. I don't either, but we will at the next meeting, Dave.
We've got more next meeting. So you got some just finer details on this, and then you've got Nancy and Laura, and you've got John Sanders budget, and then we wrap up the budget, and then we get you've got an article question, and then on the 20th you've got we've got to talk about the walking path a bit. We're going to talk about working on the assessment for the North Hartland Dam, because we'll need to move some money, make sure we have approval to, you know, move money out of a particular reserve account, move around a little bit in both instances. And as a side note, just note that we've also got Jennifer Waite on the 20th that wants to talk about the Hartland Elementary School in the 17-acre wood. But in all of that, yes, we have open discussion on the budget that needs to occur, because we'll look to approve this on January 3rd. Kind of a shortened timeline due to all the stuff that was going on in November, you know, kind of hence the backed up meeting today. Usually we have a special meeting just for the budget, but, you know, due to some of the other stuff here we are.
Dave, I didn't see anything in the auditor's report, and I see line items here for fire and rescue. But I thought that this coming fiscal year, we were going to move them out of our budget.
Oh, so they are not in our budget. Oh, they are in our appropriations. So, to be clear, we're moving them out of our bank account. So it was a few years ago, back in like 2018, maybe even 2019, the fire department is actually a part of the general fund. we took them out of the general fund. However, we were still accounting for them. You know, we still had their money in Hartland, town of Hartland bank account. Martin was doing things, their expenses no longer came to the select board because they weren't in the general fund. But they had a warrant all to themselves and they had to approve that at their meeting. So they've been out of our general fund for 2-3 years now. However, we now need to make the move where they will have their very own Heartland Volunteer Fire Department bank account. As a separate item, they're going to come back outside of Heartland's town time. They will contract on a minimal basis with Martin to run, you know, a QuickBooks account. But you know, that will be their own accounting system and not part of the town of Hartland, starting July 1st. Yeah.
Well, thanks for all the effort to get to this point.
A lot of work. Okay, I think we have finished that for this evening. And Dave, you're still on board because next is the manager's notes.
Here I was saying, man, we made the 8:18 time. So I do want to just, and I say this every year, and actually, I'm sorry, there's copies of the budget for the staff if you want to take it home with you. This is the single biggest thing that you and I do, is to set and pass the budget. Because this is what more or less guides what I and the staff are going to do during the next fiscal year and sets the parameters for projects and for spending. And so this is, you know, one of the largest policy things that the select board sets, and one of, you know, the things that binds me in the direction that I'm going to go in and what our plans are. So you can see, again, what we're doing today and what we're doing for activity. If you look at the budget that we've got in place, you know, outside of the Mill Street Bridge that up and broke on us, and the stairs to Damon Hall that we couldn't get someone here, you know, the other pieces are on track and we're moving towards, you know, implementing that. So important for you to know. So real quick, I'll try and make this an abbreviated town manager update, if I can find it to refresh my memory. As I gave an update on Mill Street Bridge, Highway Department's been kind of wrestling with the weather. Phil, I got some comments from Draper Hill, or Draper Road. Just want to let you know that we are a truck down at the moment. So we reconfigured things a little bit. So Draper's not getting done as quick as it normally does, just because we got somebody else picking that up. But hopefully that'll be rectified pretty quickly. Guardrails went on to Barron Hill. Again, this is something that we talked about a year and 2 or 3 months ago. So those are in place. We had kind of a false start. We went to do it one day and the weather was pretty inclement. But we got back to it the following day and it's in place. I haven't seen it, but I understand it's a lot better than it was.
It looks great.
It looked good? Okay. Delinquent taxes, tax sale, we had one property go to tax sale, we ended up going for $21,000, pretty good turnout for buyers. Even I think people were expecting upwards to 5 properties, we only ended up with the 1. Martin, we're now down to $38,000 in delinquent taxes. That'll change, of course, in February, but that's down considerably.
That's amazing. Really amazing.
We'll get another 7 or 8 coming in.
Wow.
Sweet home care. We'll be in the 3rd.
And I think there's an annual fair as we speak, so I think that's it.
That's fantastic.
Am proud to announce, I think, that Mary has submitted the select board update to Michelle. So I can now take that out of the town manager update. Michelle has now turned back into a very hospitable person. And
Wait, I just want to ask Bill a question. Bill, have you submitted your report?
I did today.
Oh,
At 8 a.m.
8 a.m. Oh, so you beat me. Okay, I didn't want to be the last person.
So we are making progress, and to her credit and to Mary's, we are ahead of where we normally are in putting that town report together. So that's all good news. Planning Commission has finally rounded the turn, and we're looking at a public hearing on Wednesday, January 5th at 7. Their normal meeting hours are at 6:30, but they scheduled this one for 7. Brian, we haven't put that out yet, but there are copies online anyways of the updated town plan, both one without the edits and one with the markups. We expect hard copies pretty soon to go along with the warning on that. Once that is in the rear view mirror for the Planning Commission, it then hits you guys, and you guys can, adopt or, make changes that you may or may not feel fit, but that is the time to do it. And then you will want to put that forward and put that into place at some point. I am predicting that, gosh, I'd like to say February, but knowing the PC, it may be March, depending on comments that they get at the at the public hearing. But just know that that's coming down the pike, and it will take some of your time during that process. You addressed the mass early on. The second thing under miscellaneous, I'll just, I think Jay put something out to make you all aware. Interesting little tidbit, the Supreme Court, Vermont Supreme Court came down with a ruling that has an effect on Act 250 and smaller towns that rely on Act 250 for kind of development review. Instead of a project on 1 acre of land or more, the project footprint, building footprint, needs to be 1 acre or more, significant difference between the two before it hits Act 250. I will note there's been a lot of kind of noise on this. The Supreme Court has decided to essentially rehear that very quickly. Interestingly enough, it was a 5-0 decision, but I think they realized that this has, reverberates across the state of Vermont, so they are going to take it up for additional arguments. The legislature, if they really don't like it, can always change it on their own come spring, or if totally necessary, towns can take it into their own hands, and that zoning obviously would give them the local control. So interesting thing, but I don't think we've heard the end of this discussion, and I think that we'll have to wait to see what the Supreme Court comes down with. This was a legal decision, not a legislative one, so we'll see where this comes out. I do have one last comment that wasn't on your update. I did get a note of concern from Charlie Sinsabo. It's a very important landowner in the town of Hartland along the Katy Brook Trail. He did see the article in the Vermont Standard regarding Sue Greenall's project, and also the Conservation Commission was taking up a legal trail on the Class 4 policy, so he had some concerns. Unfortunately, the newspaper article wasn't completely factual, so he didn't have all the facts. I have spoke to him. I spoke to him for about a half hour. He is going to attend the Conservation Commission meeting, the next one, which I think is Wednesday night, just to kind of sit in and be a part of that policy discussion. But he's important to Katy Brook Trail. Gordon, I think he had quite a bit of input in the late 90s, 2000, with, you know, no vehicles and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, I think we're on good terms, but, you know, I just thought I'd pass along to you that I had some important enough discussion. I think that this is something I wanted to convey to the select board. And know that I think that Rob is on it and is inviting him to be a part of the Conservation Commission meeting. So that's it.
Anybody have questions for Dave? Martha? Curtis? Phil? Gordon? I do not. Okay, thank you very much, Dave. We are now going to move to. And we have 3 pieces of correspondence. So 3 pieces of correspondence. One is from Robert Young of Brownsville, who is concerned about the posted 50-mile-an-hour speed limit on Route 12. And he has also contacted a 3 officials of the state. So about this, he feels that the safer speed limit is 40 miles an hour. And I don't believe we don't have any power to do anything about that, right?
You can put it forth to a committee in trans. You know, if you were so to decide. The interesting thing that caught my eye is usually some discussion about the Four Corners intersection. This was that whole stretch.
Yeah, he's talking about all the way to
Going all the way to
Route 4.
Ritchie at 40 miles an hour.
Yeah.
I guess my recommendation is that he can drive 40 miles an hour. Not sure everybody has to.
No, then he would create a danger.
That's kind of a rural area.
Well, my thought when I read this correspondence was that we've had a group of people talk to us about Route 5 through North Hartland. We've had people talk to us about Route 12 from 3 Corners to 4 Corners. And now we've had someone talk to us about 4 Corners beyond. So I wonder if putting all of that together, if it might be an appropriate time to approach the state and just see if they would consider doing some surveys and seeing if they think we could use a speed limit adjustment along the state highways.
I think it would be Two Rivers that would do the speed. But anyway, I will push for the speed cart again, because I think my understanding is you can't get a grant to buy one because the money to buy one, those grants only go to towns with police departments. But I don't think that would be an exorbitant expense, and it would be very worthwhile if it's one that's not fixed, but that could be moved from Route 12 to, you know, wherever out there, and then 4 Corners, and into 3 Corners, and to North Hartland. So, okay, James, you're saying you would haul that around? Okay. This is being recorded, right? So the second piece of correspondence is about a opioid claim settlement. So there was a lawsuit, class action lawsuit, I guess. And it targeted distributors and makers of opioids, and we have to, if we're interested in getting some of that money, we have to sign up for it. So Dave is going to do that on our behalf, because I think we are all in agreement, and Phil had some good ideas about where that money should flow once, well, assuming we get it. And I think he said perhaps those people who deal with people who have opioid problems, it would be like the rescue squad, fire department, who else did you say, school?
The one thing that's
Hartland
unclear-
School, the library, rec department, and the emergency store.
So we need to register, and we need to, do that step. It was a little unclear to me in the paperwork, both in what was sent to Gordon and you, and what I've seen on VLCT. I'm a little confused as to whether money is gonna flow directly to the town, or whether it goes to a town fund. There seems to be a town fund and a state fund. And then whether you request it from there, it's just not 100% clear to me based upon what I've seen so far. Whether we can, if the board chooses to, I think right now, they just want to know if you want to participate as a town.
Yes.
We need to register.
Yeah, the document seems to acknowledge that it's vague right now as to how the money's going to flow, but that we need to take the first step. Make a motion that we, as the town of Hartland, initiate I'll say paperwork to be part of the settlement.
Or part of the opioid settlement?
We need qualified first.
Oh, yeah, we got it. Yes. I think Mary, you're right. We need to-
I mean, I think whatever certification we need to do, I would support us doing it, whoever the authorized representative is.
You want to second that motion then, Curtis?
Oh, was there a motion put on the table?
Phil made a motion.
Oh, sorry, that was unclear to me. Yes, I will second it.
You don't even know what you just seconded, Curtis. It could have been something horrific or illegal.
Curtis, what time is it there?
It's
2:21.
Oh, gosh. Oh, my gosh.
You're forgiven.
Yes, you are. Okay, I don't think there's any discussion. And by consensus, we have passed the motion. Okay.
You're on a roll here.
So the third piece of correspondence, third and final, is the financial statements for the town of Hartland as of June 30th, 2021, and the independent auditor's report. So I read through this. I didn't see, like, I thought there was generally a summary that we could read and understand. I didn't see that.
Nor did I see any findings.
So there is very much a summary depending on what it is you want summarized. So there's a good hunk of info in there. So, so for the question, summary, the 30-page document is kind of a summary, but if you take out some of the notes, things are, so all your different accounts, it's got account balances in there. Tells you the fund balance that I just went into in detail. It's got that information in there. It's got a ballot, it's got a budget comparison, between what was budgeted and what came in. Audited, so depending on what it is you're looking for, it's kind of spread out. I mean, first 5-6 pages will kind of jump, but the remainder amount is a fair amount of information kind of summed up.
So isn't there usually, like what Phil's saying, findings? It's zero findings.
That's great.
Okay, well, one thing I did notice is that they said this was not an evaluation of the internal controls, et cetera. So do we ever hire anybody to do that?
It's kind of between Martin and I. What they're saying is standard language in any audit, that if someone is filtering money and they haven't caught it, their job is not to act as someone that's on the lookout for filtering money. Their job is to see if you have correctly, they feel as though your financial statements are correctly stated. What they're saying is that upon review by our auditing firm, we feel as though these are correctly stated.
And if I read this correctly, they've already suggested some adjustments, and management said we agree and made those adjustments. And I assume you are the officers of the management that they're talking about, not the officers.
So, yeah, so if you recall, I think 2 years ago, last year, I think it was a clean audit. 2 years ago, I think there was some specific language in there pertaining to how we were handling I forget which accounts did we go back and remember the whole thing with that Quagmire where we brought changed the accounts up.
Oh, yeah. We took it from suspense accounts to actual funds. All in the general fund.
Anyway, we did some pretty significant work 2 or 3 years ago with Nimerick and with the auditors, and we came out of that on the other end in one piece.
Fair.
Last year, I wasn't an audit note, but in line with GASB, with Governmental Accounting Standard Board, the listing of, so we spent time, and Bonnie, forget her last name, but Bonnie, one of the lead auditors from budget, spent time with digging up past information so that we knew where our reserve accounts originated from, whether the select board assigned. And again, you look at there's different designations. So there's assigned, and then there's I forget the terminology of assigned is if the select board puts it into a reserve account, that's handled one way. If the voters approve and tell you to put money into a reserve account, that's handled in yet another way. So there's kind of a hierarchy of how those funds are handled. We went back and looked at those, and if you look at the fund balance sheet, essentially all your funds, they are listed as restricted, unrestricted, allocated. You've got capital projects, you've got, some rent, depending on the classification. So they cleaned that up, and that was a GASB thing that had not been cleaned up. You guys knew D'Angelo for, I don't know, 20 years or something. And, we cleaned that up coming out of the D'Angelo to budget. So there's been some things like that. Again, they sat me down and had a discussion on the fire department, so we were to change that, and you'll probably see that as a note next year. We've been aware of that now. They kind of told us that was coming down the pike last year. This year, they said, okay, we've actually got to make a move. And, when they're back next summer, their expectation would be that, the fire department's on its own. So there has been changes to make our accounting, some things that the impetus was from us, and a little bit more efficient the way we transfer money, and some things that by, essentially the accounting governing board has stated that, in order to be correctly stated, you need to present it in a certain way. And that's what we did with the fund balances. So some of that happens behind the scenes that we kind of wrestle with and fix.
So that's good news.
Yeah. Congratulations to you and Martin. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Obviously, they do ask us questions like, okay, when you handle cash, how's that, tell us how that system works. But we hire them to make sure that, it's their liability clause, so to speak, to say that, our job is not to tell you that, Martin's children money, but to tell you that based upon everything that we've seen, we believe that they're correctly stated.
Okay. Well, I think we're tired now, ready to go home, talk ourselves out. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Second.
I vote yes.
I think it's at 8:30, it's approximately 8:30. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Voters, take care.
Yeah, get some sleep, Brendan. Good to
See you next Monday.
Yeah.